the honeymoon period. Everyone's so enthused. She can speak English. She's not going to die, probably. And there's absolutely going to be a backlash to that. There's absolutely going to be gaffes. She's going to say stupid stuff. Stuff's going to come out. But I think that just on balance, she's never going to be a 78-year-old blowhard who has no accomplishments of any kind to point to.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I'm Murray McElhone, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Rob. How have you been, Rob?
I'm all right, man. How you doing?
We had the last a couple of episodes ago, we did on why Joe Biden should stand down. And in it, basically we record one day and then, get it edited, blah, blah, and it comes out another day. And Rob says, I want this one to be as close to release because I don't know what will happen. And in that time, someone tried to kill President Trump. And since then, now Biden isn't running anymore. So it's good that they paid heed to the podcast, which is always nice. But we're just going to try and catch up on who's the new running mate to be president of the United States. Who's that, Rob?
That would be Kamala Harris. I think her most impressive job, frankly, was as the Attorney General for the state of California, which means that she's essentially ran the legal business of the state of California. Depends, I don't know where it is now, the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Population, 40 million people. Position of Attorney General of a large state like that is not just a question of, okay, we're going to prosecute criminals, this, that, and the other thing. It's a pretty significant policy position as well. You get to decide what kind of wrongdoing you pursue, going after sex trafficking or bad things, but also what kind of legislation should be imposed on banks or large businesses. And these are all questions that, I don't know that I would say that she was, the best attorney general ever or something like that. But when you look at the level of experience that presidents have had in the 21st century, I'd say she's pretty high up there, actually.
So better than just having a rich dad and being on TV?
Yeah. So which would explain every Republican elected this century, Bush and Trump included. And honestly, more real governing institutional experience than Saint Obama as well.
How difficult would it be to get that position? Like, as someone with an understanding of the legal process yourself, if you were say, right, this is what I want to do, how likely do you think it would be to happen, and how long do you think it would take?
Well, it's an elected position, is my understanding. I don't think that's a good thing necessarily.
Yeah.
But she was elected first as the district attorney for San Francisco, and then as the Attorney General for the entire state of California. I just want to get that out of the way first because I've been, to be clear, I'm not like a huge fan of Kamala Harris. She is not, my pick of the next Democrat to be running the country. But some of the attacks that we've seen over the past 48 hours are just so egregiously stupid. Just these nowhere hicks in Congress. Talking like she's inexperienced and she's stupid. She's the DI candidate. Basically these people who spent a bunch of time legislating cow farts before sitting in the House of Representatives, which should be one of the most august legislative bodies on the planet, but is honestly a national embarrassment as it's currently administered. And talking about this woman who ran the legal business of the state of California for most of a decade, as if she's like somehow beneath them, is hard for me to see as anything other than racist. I think there are a lot of things you can complain about in the way that Kamala Harris did that business. I think she was way too tough on crime. I think she was way too pro-cop. Things that won't actually hurt her very much in this general election.
Because I remember seeing like a compilation of why Fox basically saying why they don't like her, but it was like keeping people in prison longer so they could, be forced to do labor. And I was like, is this not all things Fox like?
Today we're going to be diving in on Kamala Harris a bit, but I think there are two items we should probably cover first. As you pointed out, it's been quite an insane
2 weeks
in U.S. politics. The first would be the Trump assassination. I think both of our instincts was to laugh when we mentioned the Trump assassination. And I should say that was because we were laughing because insane things had happened in between our recording and publishing. We do not find the attempted assassination of Donald Trump
and
funny.
the death of a fire chief.
Funny. We think it's quite horrifying and very grateful, not just because, the consequences would have been mad. We are grateful that Donald Trump is alive and unharmed.
But I think we'd also pull the Colonel Gaddafi response, as in, if this man had have been killed, it would have caused so much turmoil. Lots of other innocent people that you'd never know the name of would be harmed. So I'm just glad Trump's fine.
Well, yeah, I'm glad that Trump's fine for that reason, and also because it's real bad to get to a point where it reflects poorly on the country. It is, of course, incumbent upon me to point out that firearm that Republicans have worked really, really hard to make sure remains easily accessible to all people, that was used to do this. But anyway, it is. We are all. Everyone here at the More Freedom Foundation, and I think more broadly, is grateful that Donald Trump was not killed. Very sad about the people that were. I think that's what that needs to be said. And also something that's happening. Actually, I think it's just wrapping up now as we are recording this. That I think will be passed over rather quickly, but I think is a tremendous national humiliation, which is the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has been invited to speak at the U.S. Congress. I briefly, at our break between reportings, I sort of went through. It doesn't seem that there was anything too out of the ordinary. It was about what you would have expected, but it's disgusting. This man is carrying out mass murder. First off, this man is directly responsible for October 7th. It was his mismanagement that led to 700-odd Israeli citizens being killed and a bunch of Israeli soldiers.
But also deliberately not seeking out more peaceful Palestinian procedures and deliberately sort of encouraging the most extreme version that was possible.
Well, and it's quite straightforwardly, he diverted the Israeli military to harassing the Palestinians that wanted to work with Israel in the West Bank, leaving the border with Gaza undefended. He also, as you just pointed out, worked hard to keep Hamas funded, to keep Hamas in control, to keep the Palestinian Authority divided so as to avoid a two-state solution. This is the guy most responsible for October 7th. By far, full stop. Hamas is disgusting.
And sadly, things have stepped up, haven't they? Because America is distracted at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. Hamas is disgusting, but Hamas is a street gang. It is Netanyahu who is murdered. Some are saying as many as hundreds of thousands of Gazans over the past 9 months, exclusively for his political benefit. This is not for Israel's benefit. Multiple Israeli military officials have come out and said, this is an insanely mismanaged war that is doing Israel incredible amounts of damage. The vast majority, there's of course exceptions, but the vast majority of the family members of the hostages are like, please stop this war. Please give us a ceasefire so our family members can come back. And you know what? At this point, I'm losing a lot of interest in what Israel or the Israelis think. The scale of the mass murder that is being carried out against Palestinians is absolutely horrific. And this guy, this monstrous individual, has been invited by both houses of Congress to come and speak, and got standing ovations, it seems mostly from Republicans, but from a few particularly disgusting Democratic politicians like Mark Kelly and John Fetterman and Kristen Sinema, who ought to be, well, I mean, obviously the Republicans are undeserving of any kind of power. Certainly those Democrats should be run out of the Democratic Party and any kind of national power. Anyway, it's a disgusting spectacle. I can't really communicate more than disgust. Fortunately, I don't know. It seems like my first read on this is that Netanyahu has kind of realized that in this political moment, it's important for him to make as few waves as possible. This was something he was already committed to. I would suspect as a attempt to make Biden look worse and make it more likely that Donald Trump was elected. But I think at this current moment, with Biden out of the picture and just having Kamala Harris as a completely unknown quantity, he instead opted to keep his head low and give actually a much more conciliatory, non-U.S. political speech than the one he gave back in 2015, which honestly is probably the point at which the U.S. consensus on Israel started to break. So I think, Nanya, it is disgusting that a enthusiastic genocidaire has been welcomed to the U.S. state capitol and given standing ovations. And I think there's really all that there is to say about that at this point. I think he hasn't met with Trump yet. Perhaps there'll be some kind of divisive and absurd statements there. I don't know. It's still kind of an open and developing story, but I felt like this will be going up. We're recording Wednesday. This will be going up on Monday, and I felt like it absolutely had to be mentioned.
And I'm sure nothing will happen between now and when this goes out.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll all be quite tame and normal. So, Kamala Harris.
Who is she?
She's the Vice President of the United States. As I mentioned earlier, she worked her way up through California politics as the District Attorney of San Francisco, the Attorney General of California. And then I think she spent, was it only 2 years in the U.S. Senate before becoming Vice President. She has had a somewhat meteoric rise, but I think the fact that she frankly looks as youthful as she does might belie the amount of experience that she has.
I do find it shocking that she can finish sentences. Like, watching Joe Biden for so long and like trying to think what he's trying to mean, and weirdly trying to like, you feel like you have to baby him even though he's like the most well-defended man on earth, to then just go to like an actual competent person that can make a speech. It's just like night and day. She does look incredibly young in comparison.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think she's a young-looking person, but also the contrast is stunning. And I think what you just said there is tremendously important. And I've been kind of blown away, just sort of trying to keep the temperature of this over the past. I mean, we're still at this point. We're only 3 days, from this announcement, that by this earthquake announcement that Joe Biden is out and Kamala Harris is the very likely nominee of the Democratic Party. I have been struck by just the tidal wave of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is not someone I've ever been a fan of. Again, not my first choice for the nomination, but just the electrifying effect of someone who is capable of delivering the Democratic Party's vital and useful messages. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. She's not brilliant. She's not Obama. She's not Clinton. She's not Reagan.
But do you think that can work to her advantage, that she's not? Quite often if someone's brilliant at something, they can sort of be more polarizing, while she could maybe be better at just appealing to the broadest audience possible.
I think she's a competent politician and a very competent executive who has proven that she can run the legal business of a large city and a large state. Like, she probably, I think that this is a Republican critique, she probably didn't have the right stuff to win a competitive nomination. But you know what? She's here. She's still speaks English as a first language, unlike Joe Biden. And the alternative to her is an absolute nightmare. Donald Trump is one of the worst candidates that the Republican Party has ever fielded. Worse than Nixon, worse than, and the only reason he has won any election is because the Democratic Party has chosen thus far to run against him one of the most hated women in American history, followed by a corpse. Kamala Harris is neither one of the most hated women in American history, nor is she a corpse. I think she's very likely. I think, everyone's like, and very much this is our position at this point, Donald Trump could totally still win this. It's a real fight. We've got to get this. But I wouldn't be shocked, Rory, if by the time this episode is published on Monday, we're going to start seeing some polls that indicate that Donald Trump is cooked. And anything can happen. Anything can happen.
there's the idea that this was all staged, when I think it was more just they basically says it's a mathematical impossibility that you will be Trump now, and he just eventually accepted reality.
Yeah, I think that's
I think it was
accurate.
El Traphouse pointed out that he said only God could stop me from running, and like shortly after, Trump missed a bullet by millimeters, and then he
Exactly.
got COVID, and it's like, okay, I think God's said something to you by now.
God sending you some messages. And I guess this is going to be kind of a pro Kamala Harris episode and whatnot, and pro Democratic episode. Honestly, I had one thing is that I wanted to see this week, and that was Kamala Harris not doing a big press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu. And she not only didn't do that press conference, they have met in private. There probably will be photographs at some point. She not only just met with him privately, she refused to go sit behind him as he addressed Congress, which is what her role was. And that's good enough for me as vice president. She does not have any Palestinian.
It's something.
Yeah, she does not have any Palestinian blood on her hands yet. I'm sure she will by January 20th, 25th, 2025, at which point I will be very angry and vocal against her.
It's so long away.
Yes. But from this point onwards, now that Genocide Joe is out of the picture, I at least am going to be pretty in the tank for.
Oh no, what I was going to say is basically the theory is that this is all being staged because the Republicans have spent literal millions on advertising that basically says you don't want an old dottery man as president, and now they're the only one with an old dottery man running for president.
And to sort of add weight to the theory that some aspects of this were staged, was last week was the Republican National Convention, and it is a traditional, even as conventions have meant less and less, the conventions essentially are a week of free advertising for your guy, and there's traditionally a convention bump. That's sort of just what happens. It can fade away or whatnot. And when the Republican Party was meant to experience that convention bump, and also, the attempted assassination bump, because that was the weekend before, Biden pulls out, and all of a sudden we're in Kamala fervor, which is actually strategically rather smart decision. I'm going to be pretty in the tank for the Dems. That's a bias check going forward until November. I have already actually gotten some pretty large pushback from friends of mine who are very disappointed in that, and that's fair, but I'll be honest about it. However, I do think we have to mark what an incredibly selfish, damaging series of decisions was made by Biden and the people around him. Absolutely, I think Kamala Harris can do the job, but what a selfish prick the current president is to have robbed us of a real democratic primary process.
Where did the idea that he was going to be a one-term president come from? And did you ever believe it?
I didn't think about it much, honestly. I was just relieved that I try not to think. I try to be a little countercultural and not think about the next election until the year it's happening. I believe he described himself as a bridge candidate, which gave a lot of people the impression that he was just going to do one term.
But he was hoping to be a bridge for himself.
Yes. So a lot of people were surprised over the course of 2023 when he was just going to run anyway. I don't think I was particularly surprised. Politicians are selfish. Presidents want to be two-term presidents. That's just sort of the nature of the game. But we were running episodes last year saying Joe Biden should retire. This is a bad idea. And I've been saying that pretty much pretty consistently. I didn't realize he was in as bad shape as he was, as we all saw at that. And even not thinking he was in that bad shape, I thought he needed to
I'm just thinking
get
of,
out.
what was it, the battle box was one of his...
We resolve our differences at the battle box. That's how we do it, at the battle box, not with bullets.
Instead of saying Americans go to the I think it was the polling box or the voting
ballot
box.
Yeah, the ballot box.
The battle box just sounded very Mad Max.
Yeah, he's, it's sad and he's declining and he's done a lot of public service or whatever, but fundamentally, he's a genocidaire who tried to essentially almost handed Donald Trump another term
I
as
think he has
president on a platter.
significantly more faculties than he sometimes appears he has. Like, I think he knows I'm not the best candidate, but I want to be president again.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure. As bewilderingly his own campaign put out, like, he's probably pretty good between 10 and 4.
Yeah.
He's probably got a good 6 hours of the day. He's not up for being president. This was pretty gosh darn clear to a lot of people at this point last year, when him dropping out could have given us a real Democratic primary process.
But also, there was apparently people were saying that he was an AI at a point, because there's a point after Kamala Harris has been endorsed and he's talking on the phone and he sounds so much perked up. But I think it's just the fact he can rest.
Yeah.
Because, like, watching the debate the other time, I was like, I would be exhausted if I had to do this debate. And this man's in his 80s and he's still giving it his all. So I think there's just a fact he can just be like, I can sleep for 3 days.
Yeah. Well, and and in this way too long process between that disastrous debate and his eventually dropping out, I think it was almost a full 3 weeks or maybe even more. It was part of the reason why the flood of anti-Biden sentiment became a deluge is he just wasn't in front of people very much. Like, he did a few smile and wave things. He did a 25-minute interview with George Stephanopoulos,
Which is quite a puff piece.
Yeah, he'd essentially demonstrated that, in fact, I guess, if he had, it would have been difficult, but if he had just gotten out every day since then, gotten on the trail and been like, guys, I don't know what happened. I sure was sick. Here's how vigorous I am. But he didn't. He's
not fit for that.
Exactly. And I think it's impossible to deny that his family knew that, and his closer advisors must have known that.
Well, George Clooney said, like, was it a year ago? That's why he was starting to pull funding. He's like, this man's just far too old.
Yeah. That is an interesting detail, is that George Clooney was a big part. I mean, that's ridiculous, frankly, that like a Hollywood actor has to be the guy who stands up and is courageous about this. Yeah, very little. Again, this is a pro-democratic podcast until U.S. election day, but there is very little in the behavior of the Democratic Party over the past year or over the past 3 weeks leading up to Kamala's coronation, as we're now calling it, that is impressive. If they weren't running against the nightmarish Republican Party, I wouldn't want to support them. But they are a better option than a bullet in the head, which is essentially what the Republican Party is offering.
Can you see her being popular in the sense that she's very multiracial? Like, she has European, Asian, and African ancestry, when that is a massive makeup of the American people. Can you see that helping?
Sure. I think it's a very interesting part of her appeal. Frankly, I mean, let's be honest. I think it is outrageous the way that people are describing her as a DEI hire, this, that, and the other thing, but it is the reason she's vice president.
What's DEI, sorry?
So DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's basically a new way of saying, the way that it's being used by Republicans is as a novel slur for African American and female candidates, because they can't use the older slurs anymore.
Yes, the ones they used to say.
But diversity, equity, and inclusion is sort of like a HR speak, like human resources speak. A lot of, especially after 2020, a lot of corporations paid for their people to go through DEI workshops where learn racial sensitivity, this, that, and the other thing. And honestly, a lot of it has been nonsense. I had a good friend who actually was a DEI coordinator. Yeah, she did a lot of this work before 2020. And I was like, oh, wow, like, you must be like, this is your like happy hunting ground or whatever. Like, you must be doing great. And she was like, actually, no, I think it's all BS. I think it's clearly corporations just looking to cover their butts and
to look less racist.
Yeah, it's been deeply phony. And I think some of the DEI folks have gotten just into like parodies of radicalism, so to the point where like J.P. Morgan is like, the white man is evil, you should feel bad about this. But yeah, and moving on, let's just go do rampant capitalism. It just a bit nonsensical. But now Republicans have essentially are using that as sort of like a transfer of saying, well, this black woman, they're calling the DEI candidate. And they're essentially using that as they're asserting that she's just there because of affirmative action or whatever. And she has no qualifications. Absolutely, affirmative action has played a part in Kamala Harris's rise to power. Different levels, different choices of folks choosing to vote for. And that's a key point here, is that there are a lot of questions about Kamala Harris's rise to power. She did, in fact, in the 1990s, have a relationship with a high-powered California politician that may have helped her rise, which is a little...
Is that Willie Brown?
Yes, which is a little shady. But she also won citywide and then statewide elections on Joe Biden's coattails. So yeah, I mean, she's a woman of real merit, real accomplishments. Calling her the DEI candidate is like a way to say, well, she's just here because she's black. Well, she won statewide elections.
So when you consider that she's won statewide elections, why would you pick J.D. Vance as your second in command?
Yeah, that's something else that happened. I think the consensus, and I think it's probably a fair read, is that J.D. Vance was picked as sort of like a sop to the hyper online base, and Trump did that in the context of like, I'm running against the corpse. Bullets can't touch me. I can do whatever I want. And one of the more amusing narratives of this week has just been the bottom dropping out from under Donald Trump being like, wait a second. I have to run against a young, appealing person who can complete full sentences? I can't do that.
And debate with me.
Yeah, and apparently he's already got some pretty heavy regrets about J.D. Vance, who's kind of, it's sort of like a luxury thing. While everything's going well, let's pick this guy who's going to help me.
Was it the fact that he was just going to agree with everything, but he has no appeal to voters?
I think J.D. Vance is a little more complicated than that. There's also the fact that he's largely seen to be a creature of Peter Thiel out of Silicon Valley. That's certainly a dimension here.
Because that's one thing that was worrying about Trump, is it feels like he's got it's like all of the horrible people you wouldn't want to run America are all lined up behind him. Like it almost felt like if he had went back to back, had two presidencies, he wouldn't have had the time to have all these people reassemble and get behind him like they have now, while it does feel like there's at least a chance now that Trump won't win.
Yeah, there is a chance that he won't win. What's interesting is that, and I think is a bit neglected, is that Vance, yes, it just sort of seems somewhat inexplicable why it must be Peter Thiel bribery, but J.D. Vance, like Josh Hawley, are people who have tried to make a better case, a better intellectual case for Trumpism. As sort of like, I'm actually an economic populist. The question of J.D. Vance's economic populism and anti-corporatism is pretty fraught. Like, oh, wait a second. So this is Peter Thiel's boy, but he's against corporations? How does that actually work?
Yeah.
But at least in his positioning and his marketing, he is against the Iraq War. He is against, whereas still most of the people in that Trump could have plausibly picked as vice presidents are people who are like, more war all the time. Nikki Haley, who's just like parody of a Bush-era neocon. Marco Rubio, who actually was most of a Bush-era neocon. And I think the real appeal of J.D. Vance that people aren't talking about is that he is so fresh and new on the political scene that he can be seen as a Trump disciple. Whereas the other folks, Marco Rubio, Nikki Haley, are clearly folks who are kind of like Mike Pence was, who were like, sure, I'm for what Trump is for, even though I'm absolutely not. Whereas I think Vance could be seen as more plausibly loyal to what Trump is about and like trying to build a legacy of Trumpism, whereas all the other folks were just like barely reformed neocons.
Does he have any media understanding? Because he talks about his like time in the military, but it seems like he worked as like their like what is it, in public affairs and stuff when he was out there? Do you think that gives him much media understanding?
You see,
Or
there's a lot of cultural acceptance of. I think it's within the military as well. Like that, they're like, if you wore the uniform, you're a veteran. Like, I think, and I, someone who did not serve, I'm always kind of like, what the, like, come on, like, whereas George W. Bush definitely didn't serve because he was in like the Texas Air National Guard. That is far enough away. But like, I think the consensus, even among like, say, Tammy Duckworth, is someone who was fired upon and lost. She's a Democratic senator, I believe, who lost limbs after being fired upon. Really disliked this guy. I can't recall his name, the Republican with an eye patch in the House of Representatives. I think even they would say that, though, if you're in a uniform, you're a veteran and you were part of it. Famously, I think Pete Buttigieg had went to Afghanistan, but, was he actually involved in anything? Ron DeSantis is technically a veteran, even though he was in the JAG Corps. He was just a lawyer. So I like, maybe it's for like people who didn't serve, like myself. It's like that's an amusing gotcha. But it seems like most veterans who like the eye patch guy and Tammy Duckworth, who actually served in serious ways and were injured, do recognize that even people who didn't actually participate in warfare are veterans and are worthy of the same respect. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, like, yes, it seems like Vance was like a PR guy, but I don't
think
see a
that
lot
gives
of
him
it.
super understanding of the media that'll help for this campaign?
No, but also I just want to say, like, I'm not saying you were saying this. I don't think that, like, that's a particularly fair critique. Like, he wasn't really in the military. It's like, no, man, like, he did basic training. He wore uniforms. He didn't get to decide where to go.
Well, yeah, I heard a statistic that like a third of American soldiers that are killed is in like transportation of large units and stuff. So yeah, doing anything in the military is dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as far as like, is he media savvy? I don't know. It's funny. I've been hearing a lot about JD Vance, and I follow a guy on Twitter and enjoy a lot of his analysis named Matt Stoller, who has this sort of anti-corporate, pro-competition metric through which he views anything. And he's very friendly to JD Vance because, honestly, Matt Stoller will be friendly to anybody who puts forward his agenda in any way. So that was honestly most of my exposure to JD Vance. I hadn't really thought much about him. And man, watching him just speak, watching clips of him talking over the past week, he doesn't.
Yeah, he's not charismatic.
He's pretty off-putting. Yeah, he's pretty off-putting. Yeah.
Isn't there the Mountain Dew joke he was talking about, and it kind of went flat and no one really liked it?
It is the weirdest thing to me. Democrats say that it is racist to believe, well, they say it's racist to do anything. I had a Diet Mountain Dew yesterday and one today. I'm sure they're going to call that racist too, but it's good. I love you guys.
I love you guys.
Yeah, he's not charismatic, and he's not.
Yeah. It's just
he's
it's
not
quite
funny. Yeah, is it possible they'll change their mind and pick someone else?
I think that would be very difficult to do.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of really confident pronouncements that we've seen over the past. A lot of confident pronouncements that we've seen, especially during this 3-week period when Joe Biden was maybe not going to get out. A lot of people saying, well, there's nothing you can do now. Ballots, this, that, and the other thing. And most of that was complete BS because the Democratic convention is in late August and the names don't go on the state ballots until that convention has happened. That convention has happened for the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Can Trump, if he wants to, ditch J.D. Vance and move on? Yes, it has happened. I think famously McGovern, who lost in a massive landslide back in 1972, had to replace vice presidential candidates after the convention. So it's totally doable, but it's much more difficult. And also it makes Trump look weak and stupid.
Yeah, but now's the time to do it because, like, you have several more months before an election.
Yeah, it'd have to be very, very soon.
It'd have to be before this podcast comes out just to annoy us.
Yeah, exactly. We wasted so much time talking about J.D. Vance. I guess it's a traditional sexist thing to do. This was supposed to be a Kamala Harris podcast, and we've made it 35 minutes into it without actually talking that much about Kamala
What has been her biggest political achievement up until now?
Well, being the number of firsts that she has racked up.
Yes,
in
it is
terms
quite
of
outstanding.
she's first. Well, I guess first black vice president, right? Yeah. First.
Indian
Absolutely.
roots is the term I'm seeing here.
I think we go with Asian American more broadly as sort of how we approach that in the United States.
But she is following a proud tradition of Ulster Scots in the White House.
Oh, she's got Scots roots through who?
Yes, I heard them saying that she probably won't talk about her Irish heritage because it was an Ulster Scots which would have come over to Ireland as a part of the plantation, and then the Scots that then moved to Jamaica quite often were slave owners. So she probably won't be talking about that heritage too much in this campaign.
Yeah, and I think Republicans are always kind of using that as a gotcha, which is just kind of like, well, most African American people have some connection to slave owners through rape.
But also, I think, isn't it a huge amount of American presidents have Ulster Scots heritage?
Yes, well, there is that. So yeah, you got to have a little Scotsman in you. To be a U.S. president. Kamala Harris, raised in California and Canada, actually.
Yeah.
Born in California. God, I know that Republicans are going to make an issue of this because, they're racist fundamentally.
Was Reagan not from California?
Yes. And I think someone had pointed out that this is actually the first major party nominee. It can't be right. Feels like it can't be right, but it might actually be right. First major Democratic nominee from the West. Because actually up until the 80s, the West was sort of more of a Republican heartland. California, I mean, Nixon and Reagan are Californians. So yeah, it's just, there's probably some caveat on that stat, but it is actually the first California Democratic nominee for I believe.
Incredible.
Unless I'm missing something massive. But that's a lot of firsts. As far as accomplishments, I mean, she was the Attorney General in California. She was through a lot of complicated politics. As I was saying earlier, she appears to be very young, but will be, I guess, turning 60.
Well, she's no J.D. Vance. He's still in his 30s.
Yes. She's turning 60, and she has had a 20-year career. And I haven't done chapter and verse on her accomplishments, but she's prosecuted sex trafficking. She has gone after big banks. She has done the usual range of things that a successful, a reasonably competent state attorney general would do. She became, I think, prominent, put herself on the map while she was already on the map, but I think she had a lot of great moments in the Senate, grilling various Trump administration officials with her prosecutorial experience. So that's sort of how she came to prominence.
Is that why Trump's scared to debate her? Because quite often anyone with a legal background just tears muggles apart.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a key thing, and she's got a lot of great cases to make, which Biden utterly failed to make. It's funny. I'm having trouble pointing to signal accomplishments or that kind of thing. But what was Obama's main accomplishment before becoming president was voting against the war in Iraq, which is
apparently she's nearly as left wing for American standards as the likes of Bernie Sanders.
I don't know. No, that is not the consensus at all.
Okay, no, but I thought her voting record.
Well, perhaps you've done more research on that than I have. But
I heard
certainly not the public perception.
The Democrats have a habit of doing is sort of pretending to want to do all these things, and then when they have absolute power, they don't, and then complain when the Republicans get in. They're like, no, I wish we could do all this stuff, but the Republicans got in. It's like, but you had time. But anyway, so it's possible that once you get into the power, you do what everyone else does. You say, oh, wars are terrible. And then when you're in charge, you're like, no, let's start a few wars.
So, okay, let's try and do some straightforward biography. So she grew up in Canada and California.
During her first 3 years of being the San Francisco district attorney, the conviction rate jumped from 52 to 67%.
Very good. That is a people accomplishment right there. Not an accomplishment that I like. Actually,
Well, she was going
I
after
mean,
a lot of sex crimes, so it feels
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah.
and that I think we'll get to the 2019 flame out, and that's actually part of the problem for her, was that she was kind of effective at being tough on crime and being pro cop.
Which then
The
appeals to Republicans, which is might be one reason you'd have her.
It's great for a general election, but it was absolute poison for her in the 2019-2020 Democratic primary, which is why she flamed out so quickly. There is some dispute about, how African American is she really, which is strangely something that tends to be, as was the case with Obama, much more of an obsession for white guys like us than it ever was for African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Obama was raised primarily by a white lady and his white grandparents, and as a descendant of a white, his parents were a white lady and a Kenyan, actually does not have a lot of direct connection to the African American experience, and carefully crafted that through his professional career and personal career. Michelle Obama has the woman he married has tremendous, is an African American person from, directly from that lineage, that ancestry. And, he made a point of attending African American churches and working in Chicago and those communities, that sort of thing. And Kamala Harris, it seems, has probably done something similar. I would say it's interesting, her lineage, her African lineage comes through Jamaica, which I believe is also the background of Colin Powell, which is honestly, I see as kind of not necessarily more U.S. American, but is definitely in a broader sense, a very real African American experience come up through Jamaica. So honestly, I kind of see Kamala as closer to the African American mainstream than Obama was, frankly. All of this is
Definitely more than Trump.
well, yeah, that's for gosh darn sure. All of which is ridiculous speculation for a couple of white guys. I think, probably in part to burnish those bona fides, or perhaps it was just the best institution that she could get access to, and it's a phenomenal institution. She attended Howard University, which is a HBCU, a historically black college and university, is that what we call them, is based in Washington, D.C. It's a phenomenal institution. I've had many good friends who've gone to Howard, but that is definitely going there, I think, perhaps consciously as a American with African and Indian descent who was primarily raised by her Indian American mother. I think she might have perhaps, relished the opportunity to immerse herself more in African American culture at Howard University. She moves back to, I believe, San Francisco. Perhaps there's other parts of her biography that I'm leaving out. She moves back to California, becomes a prosecutor. And it was interesting. One of the profiles that I read was that, much like myself, her traditionally quite progressive and politically active family did not much like her choice to become a prosecutor.
Okay.
Thought that it was a little bit of a right-wing sort of punitive carceral thing for her to do, which is kind of interesting. Apparently on her Indian side, I didn't look into this in any detail. She's actually got a grandfather who was part of the Indian political system in a minor way, just as a civil servant or what have you. So yeah, she's clearly had a politically involved
upbringing,
results-oriented background that allowed her to reach a high level of success at Howard University, and then at I can't recall which California law school she went to. This is actually a part of her biography that I love. One of my favorite things about Joe Biden is that he was the first U.S. president since Ronald Reagan that had no Ivy League affiliation. The United States is filled with incredibly high-quality educational institutions, yet for most of the past 40 years, we've been governed by a small clique of people who essentially go to the same reunions at the same 5 or 6 schools. It's, the equivalent of Oxbridge in the UK or the Inox in France. And I think there's certainly a lot of elitism and snobbery in my own makeup, but I think it's about time to not have that for a couple decades, especially considering like what the interestingly, the Ivy League sponsored Reaganite consensus, despite the fact that Reagan himself was not actually an Ivy League guy, has wrought. I think it's good to have some non-Ivy Leaguers for a while. The Republican ticket actually is a double Ivy League ticket. Trump spent some time at the University of Pennsylvania Business School, Wharton, and famously J.D. Vance went to Yale. So I like, actually, that Kamala Harris has been to fabulous institutions that are not at the elite level in the United States. Of course, law school at a California law school is pretty elite as well, but it is not just part of that clique of insiders that has been running the country for 40 years, for too long, I would argue.
Do you think the fact she just comes across as a normal person helps? Because I remember seeing it, she seemed to have a series of cooking videos on her YouTube channel.
Okay, but wait a minute. So your grandmother has the recipe that would involve a whole dozen eggs. So this is for how many cookies?
Like 100.
And she just was like, oh yeah, that kind of seems more like a normal person, definitely compared to the likes of Hillary Clinton. Like
Sure.
I'm always just surprised. There's a great photograph of her in like a normal apartment, and she's just horrified at how small it is. But also Donald Trump.
She's just very confused.
Yes, they're both just very strange, unique, pampered, spoiled people, while Kamala does seem a bit more down to earth.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, Kamala seems like a real weirdo, but not like, but in a more charming.
Not a crazy cat lady.
Yeah, as J.D. Vance has famously called her.
Is it George Washington didn't have any children?
Yes, that is a very key point. That I think should be emphasized. J.D. Vance, I think perhaps unfairly to J.D. Vance, that was being pitched as something he had said recently.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too.
By a lot of people, but I think this is something that he had said. It's a gross thing to say.
A
gross thing to say, but he said Kamala Harris doesn't have any children, so she doesn't have any stake in this country and how it is run. And yes, George Washington would be an example of someone who didn't have any children, and I don't think anybody really disputes that he had a stake in the country and how it was run.
But do you think the fact these sort of attack points are coming out is the fact that the Republicans, as of yet, have nothing really to attack her with?
Yeah, they don't know how to do it. I think we're going to hear a lot more about Willie Brown because when she was a young up and coming prosecutor, she did have a relationship with a guy who was a big political figure, and I think eventually became the mayor of San Francisco, and that may have helped her political career. And I'm sure the Republicans are going to find better and less horrifyingly offensive ways to bring that up. But at this point, yeah, they're just doing memes of her giving blowjobs, and like it's all quite crass. Seems to be pretty well.
I don't think it's going to make Republican women not vote for her. Like it's a great way to alienate your base.
Well, I don't know about the base. It's amazing. I mean, frankly, at this point, and there are many, many millions upon millions of women who are confirmed Trump supporters, and frankly, they, to some extent, they kind of hate women. So women who hate women. So what it is pretty well, what this approach is well calibrated to do is drive Democratic turnout, make the people who were never going to vote for the Republicans anyway enraged against the Republicans for bringing the conversation to this level. To the point where even Mike Johnson, who's is it Mike Johnson? Whatever. The thug who's currently the Speaker of the House of Representatives is trying desperately to discipline his caucus and say, stop saying DEI, stop bringing up race, stop calling her a slut. We have better arguments that we can make. And he's having trouble restraining them. So yeah, the Republicans are kind of at a loss here.
News just in, Biden is still alive. There was a big rumor that he had died, but he's been seen entering the White House. So
that's nice. Who cares? He's yesterday's news. We can move on.
But yeah, they're complaining that she's getting like endorsements from Charlie XCX, which is like, this is what happens in a presidential debate, and now younger people are going to know about her.
Yeah, no, it's
which is
terrible.
What you're supposed to do in these sorts of things.
Yeah, they sure got her there. So she's a prosecutor in California, works her way up through the ranks in California. She crucially wins 2 very large-scale elections long after this relationship that's supposedly, the reason has political power. And then she goes on to win a Senate race which is also, that's there are Senate races and there are Senate races. In a place like Wyoming or Montana, I guess you butter up the governor, or you're probably the governor's kid, and you can probably figure out how to be senator pretty easily. Like in California, there are 40 million people who have to vote for you, or there's a population of 40 million, and you have to. And she has won that election. I think the big thing that we have to talk about before we wrap this up is her flame out in 2019, 2020. And I think that this is something that is a acknowledged problem for women who want to rise to national political office, and African Americans who want to rise to national political office. Look at the mayor of New York City right now, who's a famous clown, but became the mayor of New York City because he was a black guy who was tough on crime. And this is like one of the most established routes through which a woman, and especially an African-American woman, can rise to power, is you've got to be kind of tough on crime. And I don't know if she was politically minded when she decided to be a prosecutor. I assume she was, when she decided to be a prosecutor all the way back in the 90s. But this is sort of like one of the only ways you could rise to power as a black woman, was to, sort of skew to it's a comparison I'm sure neither would appreciate. But, Thatcher was able to become prime minister because she was super tough. Clinton had to craft this warmonger reputation. And Kamala Harris, coming from nothing compared to Thatcher and Clinton, was like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be the competent, tough on crime black woman. She got a national profile to the point where she could competently run for president at the absolute worst time, which was the rise of first Ferguson, and then in 2020, the George Floyd. Actually, I think her candidacy may have flamed out entirely before George Floyd became a thing in June 2020. But certainly already Black Lives Matter, Ferguson, this was part of the basic language of the 2019-2020 primaries. What folks don't remember is that the 2019-2020 primaries, considering where we landed and what was actually possible, was a progressive fairyland. Like it was nonsense. Biden barely won in 2020, and everybody in the 2019 and 2020 Democratic primary were kind of assuming that, everybody hates Trump so much, we're going to get a landslide. We're going to get Obama 2008 numbers. So we got to start talking about how we're going to do Medicare for all, and we're going to do this thing and that thing, and we're going to rip up criminal justice root and branch. And it was nonsense considering where we actually landed. Of course, perhaps the reason we barely beat Trump in 2020 was because Biden is such a bad candidate, but that's a different argument. So Kamala comes into this and has spent her entire political life being like, I'm the toughest nails prosecutor. I'm the one who puts the sex traffickers away. I'm the one who prosecutes more people. I'm the one who puts everyone in jail. And then she has to compete in this thing where it's like, and it does seem like she didn't handle that very well. She's like, I guess I want to abolish ICE, even though she was famous as a prosecutor for deporting people. I want to, and she was basically and flamed out entirely. I think there's probably some questions about her management of her campaign, but I think her fundamental problem was that she was a kind of politician that was not what the Democratic Party wanted in 2019 and 2020. However, the things that made her so toxic in that primary challenge are exactly the kinds of things that are appealing in a general. I'm the normal cooking channel gal who just also happens to be a tough as nails prosecutor who wants to be tough on crime. And that's actually a pretty good pitch for the general election. Over the past couple days, they've actually just been running with one of her spots from 2019, which is the simple comparison. I'm a prosecutor. Donald Trump is a felon. When I was a prosecutor, I went after sex offenders. Donald Trump, and it's very carefully legalistic and accurate.
She
Donald
says
Trump,
everything that she did, and then she basically goes, so I know Donald Trump very well. He's all of these horrible things.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
Well, what's interesting, so I watched the entire 17-minute pitch, which is, I guess, kind of the longer version, her first really big, like, campaign speech, where she had said, I don't know what the minutia of this is. She had secured the necessary delegates to be the nominee. I don't think that's actually the case yet, but I mean, the assumption, I think a safe assumption at this point, is that nobody's running against her. She's going to be the Democratic nominee.
But it's illegal that Joe Biden isn't going.
What's
I'm
that?
hearing a lot of Republicans complaining and saying that this is illegal and Joe Biden should be forced to go, even though they've been complaining that Joe Biden is running and he's too old.
Yeah, the Republicans are whiners who don't know how laws work. What's interesting that I noted watching this 17-minute announcement speech was how carefully legalistic she was. I mean, libel laws are nowhere near as strong in the United States, but it's just incontrovertible fact and not like nasty political speech to point out. He's like, I persecuted sex offenders. Donald Trump has been required to pay money in civil procedures because of his sex offense. It's like, just like, I prosecuted for-profit colleges that were fraudulent. He has been convicted of fraudulence, and it was just very nicely done. And yeah, she's not brilliant. She's not Obama. She's not.
But sometimes you can be too brilliant, and then you come across as too polished and phony. You need a little bit of clunk.
But she's competent.
Oh, definitely.
And she's, to some extent, I think she is a bit of a blank slate. She does have that sort of thing with Biden where it's like, is she left? Is she right? Or is she actually just eager to be in the middle of her own party? Like, Biden has governed as a much more progressive left-wing guy than he ever was as a senator because the Democratic Party is a lot more left-wing than it was back when he was a senator. And I think that Kamala Harris is competent enough, wants that second term, is young enough, it's just a completely different election now.
Oh, definitely.
And I got to say, I'm pretty optimistic about Kamala Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump.
Would you like some more optimism?
Absolutely.
Polls just in, she's 2 points ahead.
Is that the Reuters Ipsos? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a little early to tell, but I do think that by the time this is published, I think we'll see more like the Reuters Ipsos, and we'll see a real move in her direction. I don't want to jinx it or anything.
How bad will it be if Trump refuses to debate her? Because it just makes him look like a coward.
I think he's basically saying, I want to do it on Fox instead of ABC, which also makes him look like a wuss.
Because isn't it one of those things that Fox still take it serious, and quite often the debate is still much more neutral than normal Fox. So even hiding in Fox won't save him?
No, it won't. And it's, I think he has to. And I think he's already conceded that he will debate her after a couple of days of whining. It's, and you know what? A lot of people are like, she's going to wipe the floor with him. And she doesn't even have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
She just has to do what she did yesterday in that 17-minute announcement speech. Where she has a solid minute and a half where she just does a basic laying out of the stakes on abortion. That is the Democrats' best issue.
Mm-hmm.
She just, with a rousing, it is the woman's right to choose what to do with their body, delivered by a woman. And Biden couldn't even say that,
No.
I think that even
it is shocking just how night and day these two candidates are.
Yeah,
You're having to do like logic puzzles when Biden talks to know what the sentence is meant to be.
It's difficult to discern what he's trying to say, and Kamala just has to hit the beats. That's all she has to do. And because if Biden had just hit the beats, Trump didn't do an amazing job.
No. He quite often just says, I don't know what he said. I'm not going to answer that.
Yeah, we're definitely in like the honeymoon period. Everyone's so enthused. She can speak English. She's not going to die, probably. Like,
Yes.
And there's absolutely going to be a backlash to that. There's absolutely going to be gaffes. There's absolutely she's going to say stupid stuff. Stuff's going to come out. But I think that just on balance, she's never going to be a 78-year-old blowhard who has no accomplishments of any kind to point to. She is a competent, normie Democrat who's going to work pretty hard to read the polls and deliver to the American people, what she can.
And has won multiple elections in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm very confident about Kamala Harris.
With a lot of political experience.
So, yeah.
So I'm just glad that the Democratic Party listens to the podcast and took our heed.
Indeed. Yeah, we're tremendously influential here at the More Freedom Foundation. Yeah, clearly.
Hopefully nothing will happen between now and publication.
Well, things have got to keep happening, Rory, because, we need things to talk about.
We just need a couple of days.
We don't want to have to, keep doing deep research on the French election.
I know, but we might get our head around it yet. Fourth time lucky.
One of these days. One of these days.
Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.